Hi, I'm Lucas.
And I'm Brian.
And this is the Quacks Podcast. Hey guys, so quite the interview for you today. I have on Jan Groh, who is an advocate for Ehlers Danlos syndrome. So she has it herself, and she's going to tell you her story, but it's basically a rare genetic hypermobility disorder where your tissues are too elastic. So this means they are usually quite flexible and stretchy and bendy. Now, where it can lead to problems is when joints pop out of their sockets too easily. You can get pain. You can even have internal organs like start to shift and get out of place. To use an analogy, it would be like a skyscraper that instead of being built out of steel beams is built out of wood. The building's still a building, but now it's much more prone to sway in the wind and collapse and all that. So you might be asking, Lucas, why should I listen to an hour podcast on this rare disorder? How does this affect me? Well, the disorder might not be as rare as most doctors think. There are multiple types of Ehlers Danlos, and the most common type does not have a genetic marker making it easy to diagnose. Now, not only that, often other conditions like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue are diagnosed when in reality it is a hypermobility disorder. So Jan estimates that perhaps somewhere around 10% of the population has some type of hypermobility. And often people go through their whole life with, IBS or bad teeth, painful joints, nearsightedness, which are all symptoms, and they have no idea that they may have some mild type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And if that's the case, there are supplements and other things which can be done that over time will improve their health. So I listen to a lot of history podcasts. I love, learning about the Dark Ages and Rome. But one of the things that bothers me is how often people are stricken with some illness with really no discernible cause. People are born with a quote-unquote weak constitution. Now, right now, I'm listening to Tom Holland's Rise of Christendom, which is awesome. It's all about the Dark Ages. But one of the emperors, I believe Otto the second or third. Anyway, he dies of hemorrhoids, which is nuts because hemorrhoids is one of these things that maybe happens more in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And so I thought, I wonder if this guy had some kind of hypermobility. It just makes me realize that, for all the medical knowledge we have gained these days, there's still so much more we do not know. As they say, a problem identified is like 80% solved. So part of what I want to do with this podcast is give a voice to the cutting edge therapies and new theories out there. Anyway, this interview, definitely new ground for me. So enjoy this interview with Jan. Hey everybody, I have Jan Groh with me today, and a little bit of a interesting podcast, learning about something that I don't think a lot of people are going to know about. So Jan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. You're an author, and you run the popular Twitter account OTwist, which is a really interesting follow if anybody's on Twitter these days. And you talk about kind of this mysterious unknown condition that I think a lot more people have than they realize, called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So why don't we start off by you telling us a bit about yourself and maybe kind of your history with this condition?
Sure. Lucas, thanks so much for having me, because this is it's not a rare condition. Contrary to what you'll hear from the medical establishment, a lot of us are increasingly feeling it's not rare. It's rarely diagnosed. Everybody knows somebody who probably has this condition or a variation of it. And all doctors have seen it, whether they know it or not. They just may not realize it or have recognized it. And I will admit, I myself hadn't heard a thing about it until I went suddenly from walking to wheelchair in 3 weeks, 8 years ago in January of 2012. I like to joke that the world didn't come to an end in 2012, just my world as I knew it, right?
Yeah.
So you're welcome. I took care of that for y'all.
Gosh, I forgot even all about that, the whole Mayan calendar thing. Anyway, go ahead.
Right? Yeah, I wasn't worried about the world ending, but boy, oh boy, did my world come to a screeching halt as I knew it. And I had always had various and sundry issues through my life, even as a child, but we could never explain them. I don't want to say they were subclinical, but they were, sort of subclinical, as in they didn't rise up to a level of concern. We would go to the doctor, we'd look for answers, but never find any. We often don't show things on scans until somebody fully dislocates or has a problem. And so I first suspected I had a hypermobile condition 5 years before, in 2007, when I injured my upper back. Collating medical records at a large hospital here in Portland, and they were still paper-based at that time. And so I would collate up to 2 feet of paper every day in a mad hurry, because you had to get the charts ready and in order for any doctor to call for them at any time. So I was like a mad librarian, madly publishing books. And all that twisting, I took out T3 through 5, and that was unusual because that happened within 2 weeks of starting to do that. And I was substituting for my friend who was out after doing it for 15 years without a problem. So clearly my body didn't hold up as well as hers did and everybody else's. And I would fatigue easily. I was even diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome 30 years ago at the Harborview Chronic Fatigue Clinic in Seattle, because we couldn't find any better explanation for my waxing and waning fatigue and chronic pain. I was 1 point shy of a fibromyalgia diagnosis of the tender points or trigger points. So, I didn't get to have that support. So I just got on with life and tried to do my best until I fell apart 8 years ago, all of a sudden. And then it's like, okay, all right, she's not faking it. She's not just depressed. She's not just a woman. There's clearly really something wrong.
Is that a diagnosis these days? Well, we've had all the scientific minds come together. You are a woman.
Right. Exactly. Seriously. I mean, ask any women, you meet. We seriously get, dismissed on a lot of our issues and complaints. And if you guys only knew, it's just like, oh my gosh, but in any case, you're just weak. I'm petite. I'm 5'4", and until recently, I've never been very heavy, and so I was often seen as kind of a weakling, and I was a weakling, and literally, I'm not ashamed to say that because I had weak connective tissue, but I didn't know it. And as a child, I could do contortionist tricks. I didn't work for the circus, but at home, on the holidays, I would do party tricks for the family, and we just never thought anything of this. And we're all nearsighted, all geeky, nerdy, intellectual, academic types. My dad was an engineer. My sister became an engineer. I was supposed to become an engineer, but I think I have ADHD in hindsight, and I kept jumping the fence for greener grass. So I ended up with a BA in liberal arts. But I ended up becoming a self-taught and self-employed and successful Access database programmer before I was done, which is what I was doing when I fell apart so suddenly in 2012. It started to come on in 2011. Noticeably. And then it was like in 3 weeks, 1 week, I'm like, anybody got canes? Next week, anybody got crutches? Next week, anybody got a wheelchair? And my friends are like, what happened to you?
Wow.
What's going on over there? And I'm like, wouldn't you like to know? Wouldn't we all like to know? And so finally, my doctor of 15 years at that time, who'd seen me off and on with all these various complaints and kind of, dismissed it, going, no, I don't think, this is anything big or whatever. He's like, okay, you can go see the geneticist now. Clearly, there's something going on. And also my family history on my dad's side. I didn't know my mom's side at that time, but my dad's side of the family, the Groh side, snapped into focus all of a sudden, because I realized that's why my aunt, my elderly aunt, Kathleen, she's a Catholic nun. And so if I say Sister Kathleen, she's not my sister, she's my aunt. But she had always had back problems and always used a cane or a walker ever since I knew her. And so that had to start in her 40s. And I'm 52, by the way. And so I fell apart at 45, 44.9 years old, 8 years ago. And she turned out to have fallen apart in her 40s. So suddenly this all kind of snapped into focus, and she and my dad and I all led the pack in terms of issues with our tissues, problems with our joints, pain, various signs of this. So that by the time I saw the geneticist on Valentine's Day, 2012, I was able to put together a spreadsheet, and it was really clear there was something going on in our family in a familial way. I was just the first to get diagnosed. And my geneticist did a very thorough exam. It was a long appointment, 2.5 hours, and thank God my friend was there. And she appreciated the thorough family history, and I had speed read the couple of books that I could find at the time, and studied, the criteria at that time. And she agreed with me. She said, "Yes, I do believe you have some form of Ehlers-Danlos at this time. As to what type you have, I don't know. I want to rule out 2 of these rare types." And back then, we only spoke of 6 main types of this. But she said, if you don't have these 2 rare types that I suspect based on your family history, then you've got the most common type for which that we don't have a genetic marker yet. So it's a genetic condition. It runs in the family. And the most common type, unfortunately, doesn't have an easy test. You have to do a clinical diagnosis, meaning they examine you and match you to a set of clinical symptoms and signs that best fits.
So this is, you're basically saying this is a genetic condition, so you can't just get this. You're born with it.
Exactly. I'm born this way, baby.
And there's a lot of different types, and the most common one doesn't really line up super easily with these genetic tests. That seems kind of a bummer.
It is a big bummer. It's a real huge hairball and a big point of contention as we speak, because the diagnostic criteria and the classification scheme for this whole family of disorders just got updated 3 years ago in 2017, and for the first time in 20 years. So when I was diagnosed, we were working off of the 1997 Villefranche nosology, and which mentioned 6 types. And so that wasn't so hard to wade through. Out of 5 of the types were really rare, and the 6th type, which was the most common, it wasn't that hard to differentiate. There wasn't that much to wade through. But fast forward to 2017, and they've added 7 more rare types into the official nosology, which is the classification scheme. And 12 of them are really rare, and the most common type still doesn't have a genetic marker or a test you can take. You have to do this clinical. There's this whole little algorithm that you run. You check. You have to check off all these criteria. You have to match a certain number of criteria on a checklist to pass.
Okay. So real quick, before we go kind of farther, just for people who don't know, could you kind of tell them what this condition entails?
Sure. So what the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes is a collection of genetic collagen defects. And so what happens is it causes issues with either the collagen molecules themselves may be faulty, so that even if in the extracellular matrix of your connective tissue, it's what forms your connective tissue. It's kind of the glue that holds the body together. It's if you thought of your tendons and ligaments as rubber bands, it's what gives them the snap back so that your bones and joints are held in place. And it also keeps your inner organs, your hollow organs, and your vasculature kind of tight. It gives it good tone so that you can have good blood pressure and you don't have aneurysms, and you don't burst things. People with the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes and the new diagnostic category that I'll be introducing shortly, called the hypermobility spectrum disorders, we have weak connective tissue, and so what'll happen is almost everybody is hypermobile, which is a very specific medical term for having joints that go beyond normal range. We are the double jointed people. We are the people that might be contortionists. We are the freaks and geeks of the circus. A lot of performers, a lot of ballet dancers, models, musicians will have this, because it can actually be yoga instructors. It can be an advantage. We're all your yoga instructors who have those amazing ranges, and you should be careful with that, by the way. That's hypermobility, that bendiness that you see. Now, I want to make a really pedantic point right out of the gate. Just because someone is hypermobile or bendy does not mean they have Ehlers-Danlos. It's just a flag and a trait. So it's just something to make note of. But hypermobility itself is just a trait, like red hair color, for instance. It's something you're born with. It runs in about 10% of the world's population across all ethnicities and backgrounds, all races. It doesn't discriminate. It's everybody, all the different, body types. Everybody has it. in about 10% of the population. Not everybody, technically at this point, they say that not everybody who's hypermobile has a connective tissue disorder, such as the Ehlers Danlos syndromes or the hypermobility spectrum disorders, which are newly introduced, or the other similar connective tissue disorders I'll also mention in a little bit. So what happens is you'll have a family history on one or both sides of a lot of joint problems. It lends to early onset arthritis. Now, arthritis itself is an acquired condition. You don't catch it like a virus or a bug, but it comes on later. You're not usually born with arthritis.
Yeah.
It comes on with time. Often, osteoarthritis comes on with age and wear and tear, and so the other forms are acquired with environmental stress and other things like rheumatoid arthritis and some of the other autoimmune issues. Mm-hmm. And that's also a big red herring, because what happens is a lot of the Ehlers Danlos and hypermobility spectrum disorders are masked by arthritis and all the autoimmune conditions, including lupus and Sjogren's and MS. So people will get diagnosed with the highly comorbid autoimmune issues first, and their rheumatologist will miss the underlying hypermobility.
So when they're hypermobile, are you talking about the muscles or like the tendons and ligaments and skin? Is it everything?
It's a little bit of everything. Primarily, the tendons and ligaments will be weak and too stretchy, so to speak. So do you watch America's Got Talent or
sure.
any of those kind of things? Do you remember Sophie Dossi?
I don't believe I do.
From a couple of years ago, she was a contortionist, really beautiful young artist who came on. She was a hand balancer. She would balance on her hands on those little tiny like pedestal things and bend over backwards, and she could shoot a bow and arrow with her feet. It was really remarkable.
Wow.
Or another example would be, and almost nobody's heard of this because they're from the 40s, but the Ross sisters did a number called Solid Potato Salad. It's really weird. It's kind of freaky. Don't watch this before lunch. And so you'll see that we can be really bendy, and some people can even just like dislocate and pop back in their joints themselves. So this lends to some of the confusion that doctors have around us, because sometimes they'll get a patient who, like Sophie or somebody else, can contort themselves really easily, and they can do these, wriggle around, and like Harry Houdini was probably hypermobile. That's how he could contort himself into such small, tight spaces and get back out again, because he could pop. He was literally popping joints out, probably shoulders and maybe his hips, and that's how we can do these amazing contortionist acts. But what happens is with Ehlers Danlos, you have additional issues with your tissues. It's not just the bendiness. You'll have a lot of pain. You might have inner organ issues. People with some of the more dangerous types, such as vascular, can rupture their inner organs and their vasculature.
Wow.
So the people who die of aortic aneurysms or a ruptured, dissected vertebral artery, or they'll tear their esophagus, or they'll have a bowel rupture. It's really pretty bad.
So if super bendy, hypermobile, it doesn't mean you necessarily have Ehlers Danlos, but if you have Ehlers Danlos, is everybody with that super bendy?
Pretty much. There is a point of contention. This is a political hot potato in the field right now. There's a group of us who are lobbying hard to the Ehlers Danlos Society and the powers that be that are making the criteria. We feel strongly that not everyone who has it is necessarily hypermobile. You'll see in a family constellation, there will be somebody like me who could be a contortionist as a child. I have actually stiffened with age. That's the other problem, is that not everybody does stiffen with age, but some of us do. I joke that I'm like the planet Pluto, who, the poor thing, nobody consulted Pluto when we demoted it to a dwarf planet back in 2006, right? It didn't change a spot. It's still the same, in the same orbital, orbit, and it didn't change its mass or, center of gravity or anything. It's just out there. We just changed our minds about it. We just said, oh, you're no longer a planet, Pluto. You're a dwarf planet.
Yeah.
So I'm no longer hypermobile. I guess I did change a spot technically, but I haven't changed. I'm still Jan, and I've just stiffened with age and
Gotcha.
arthritis. And my muscles are all knotted and tight. Like every massage therapist I see and every chiropractor I see is like, God, you're really tight, because my poor muscles are working so hard to hold my skelly together, to make up for my weak ligaments and tendons.
Okay, that makes sense. So, what makes it so difficult to diagnose? Is it just the genetic component that they can't find, or is it that they don't know about it?
It's primarily a lack of recognition, because in doctors' defenses, in their defense, and my own doctor's defense, I forgave him. I literally, in one of my early appointments in 2012 with him, I warned him. I said, whatever I got is getting worse, and can I see the geneticist now? And he's like, yes, you may. Finally, it's like, okay, she's not faking. Yeah, like. I said, hold your wrist out. And he's like, yeah, mind you, we had a good, working relationship. And I very gently, pretended to slap his wrist. I just kind of tapped it lightly. I was, I'm like, so what's that for? I said, for dismissing me all these years. And then I held my wrist out and I said, now slap mine. He goes, why? I said, for not complaining enough, for not complaining loud enough, because there's fault on both sides, where sometimes patients, either like in my case, we stop complaining because we've gotten dismissed so many times that we just give up. We're like, oh, whatever, I'm just going to get on with life and do my best and whatever. Or everybody does that because you're surrounded by your family members, and we tend to be attracted to each other as friends and lovers, platonically and romantically. We seem to attract each other. And so you're surrounded by birds of a feather. And or the doctors only know about, and in his defense, my doctor only knew about the grossest signs of the rarest types, AKA the low-hanging diagnostic fruit. So they've been told this is really rare and you're almost never going to see it. And in fact, that's why the logo that you'll see on the Ehlers Danlos Society website and a lot of websites that have to do with this involves zebra stripes, because we've co-opted the zebra, which is the rare disease mascot, because the saying goes in medical school that upon hearing hoofbeats, you're told to diagnose and think horses, which is in the Western world is the more common possibility, when in fact we turn out to be those rare zebras. And so we're trying to get all the doctors to think zebras. I have been leading the charge saying, I don't think this is rare. I really don't think this is that rare, at least not the most common type. Some forms are extremely rare, like in only 60 to 100 people in the world. But the collection as a whole and the most common type is actually quite common, in my opinion. And so I joke, and I even wrote a post saying, but I'm a horse. I'm really a horse. I'm right here in front of your nose. It's just, you're not seeing, these, it's really common. We are the frequent flyers in the medical offices. It's just that, and I'm going to quote somebody, we don't know who the author of this original quote is. We know somebody who's quoted them. Anyway, it's, if you can't connect the issues, think connective tissues. Because they're thinking, oh, you should be in a wheelchair and you'd be so afflicted from birth that you couldn't walk. And that's mistaken. They've been misled. And it's really unfortunate, because while that's true for some people and some of the most rare forms, again, that's the low-hanging diagnostic fruit. That's the easy picking. They got to get out their ladders and go on up the tree. There's a ton more fruit up there. But you gotta do a little work. You got to go get that ladder and you got to go climb. So they're not looking for it. And so like I ended up having, in 2008, I started walking to work because I was in my 40s, and I thought, well, this would be a good thing to do. I had a job nearby about 2 miles away, and it's a beautiful neighborhood. And I thought, why get a gym membership? Let's just walk to work. And I started doing that. In 2 weeks, I came down with neuromas, which are an outpouching of the nerves in your feet. It's kind of a nerve hernia. And it was painful. And I was like, suddenly I couldn't walk. And I'm like, that's odd. I didn't know I had Ehlers Danlos yet. I didn't even know I was hypermobile yet. And I went to see a podiatrist for my first time. And he goes, oh, yeah, you women, that happens. You guys get these in your 40s. Just stay off your feet, wear these arch supports, and see me if it doesn't get better. In worst cases, we can do surgery, but it's not recommended. So, okay, I rested. I stopped walking to work. It got better. It receded on its own. But why would he have thought to look above my feet and notice I'm nearsighted, I'm bendy as I wave my hands, I have visible veins, crooked teeth, poor posture, hypermobile. And why would he think to look at the rest of my chart? He's a foot doctor. He doesn't look at all the other issues with my tissues.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few symptoms there. How would someone know if they have Ehlers?
Great question. And I want to refer folks to my very juicy website page called When Else to Suspect EDS.
All right. And I'll have those in the show notes.
Sure. If you go to ohtwist.com, ohtwist.com, people can find all of this. I've tried to organize it for both doctors and patients in an organized fashion to make all these kind of questions easy to answer. But some of the common signs would be, again, the early onset arthritis. You'll have pain in your joints that isn't better explained by something like an autoimmune disease. And even if you have an autoimmune disease, you may have a history of hypermobility prior to it, a family history of joints. You might be nearsighted. You might have weak or crowded teeth, fallen arches in your feet. You might have hernias, prolapses, tendinitis, bursitis, chondromalacia patella. That's a fancy word for the cartilage behind your knees gives out quickly or easily. I frankly suspect one of our former trailblazers here in Portland, that's our basketball team, our professional basketball team, poor Greg Oden, he just had chronic knee problems. The poor guy, he was a really great basketball player, but he went down with just repeated, he had this one trick knee that just kept going out on him. Real tall guy, big, wonderful basketball player, but his knee just betrayed him. And I've never talked to him, but I mildly suspect him. I'm like, I get it that there's a lot of strong force in basketball, but not every basketball player's knees give out like that. We are the people who injure easily. You'll tear muscles and tendons easily. We bruise easily, really easy bruising. In fact, sadly, a lot of parents end up having their children medically kidnapped as babies or toddlers because they will come, they're good, concerned parents, and they're seeing this bruising on their children, or their child is crying and complaining of something. And they go in, and because we bruise so easily, because bruising is just burst capillaries. It's a tiny little, it's blood that has pooled under the skin from burst capillaries. We have weak veins and arteries, weak vasculature. And so we bruise easily, we get blood blisters easily, we have nosebleeds easily. So the doctors, a nurse or a doctor will see a child come in and they see all these bruises, and they might call CPS before they have done a due diligence. And so it's kind of scary, because I've had some friends have their children medically kidnapped, and it's really traumatic for everybody involved. It's just really painful, really traumatic, because it's enough to contend with the darn disease, never mind trying to fight to get your kid back.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah. And doctors will even fight with each other. Like, if one doctor thinks you have Munchausen's, other doctors have to fight with that doctor to convince them otherwise. And so you have to build this huge case, and it's hard. So, we're really, and that's not to say there aren't cases of child abuse. We of course appreciate everybody's, care and concern on that front. But I want to urge nurses and medical personnel to think twice when they, if you suspect child abuse, just do a quick cursory glance. Do you see signs of hypermobility? Are they nearsighted? When they wave their hands, do their look for Google flying bird hand sign. You'll see that people's fingers bend back.
I've also seen people's wrist, like they can bend their fingers back all the way and touch their forearm.
Yes.
Is that pretty diagnostic?
Yeah, that's diagnostic of hypermobility. So it doesn't mean you have Ehlers Danlos again, but that is a sign of hypermobility. Absolutely.
Okay.
You'll have children that have a lot of GI trouble. We have a lot of IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome, unexplained IBS.
Okay.
And actually, fibromyalgia is my big red flag. I think fibromyalgia is a throwaway diagnosis, because where doctors they don't have a better explanation, because again, they were told that Ehlers Danlos is rare. So if you're still walking and talking and you're high achieving, because we tend to be really high achievers until we go down.
Yeah.
They'll say, well, then you just have fibro, and they have no explanation for fibromyalgia yet, do they? And I'm like, I think I found the man, or in my case, the Jan behind the curtain.
So what do the doctors offer? If you have all these things going on, I mean, what kind of treatments are there?
That's a great question. And I appreciate you asking it, because sadly, too many of us are told, I see this every day in my support group online. People are dismissed with, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so why bother getting diagnosed? And that's a real shame and a tragedy when it happens. That's really a disservice to the patients, because the benefit of getting diagnosed is not only just validation, period. Like some of us, I mean, people, the top 3 causes of death that I have observed in Ehlers Danlos, by itself, it's not generally lethal, but a couple of the rare types can involve some lethal problems, such as ruptured vasculature, as I've already mentioned, and other ruptured organs. But the other top causes of death are complications of cranial cervical surgery. They might have to fuse their cervical spines. And people have had complications from that and died from that. And also depression, literally suicide, because people have been in so much pain and been so gaslit and so dismissed for so long that they just give up. They're like, screw this, I can't take it. And they just succumb. And it's sadly common. Oh, and the other top cause would be gastroparesis, which is basically you have extremely slow motility in your digestive tract. Your food does not move through your digestive tract at the normal rate. It stays in pools in your stomach and rots there. It will, so you don't have you don't digest food. You get no nutrition, and it just rots, and you get sick, and it's really painful. And people will literally die of malnutrition, even if they eat well, even with supplements and all kinds of things.
So basically, if you get diagnosed, they kind of just shrug. They're like, we don't really have anything to offer you.
Well, some do, but the ones that are smart, the smarter ones, and there's word is starting to spread slowly, thanks to the online community for both doctors and patients. Social media is really helping to spread this information. There is some supportive treatment, and the smarter doctors are wisely. Of course, you want to triage whatever your primary issues are. Like if somebody has a bad hip or a bad shoulder or something and needs surgery, or, you want to pick the top issue that needs addressing. But in general, the supportive therapy would involve things like, from the palliative side, you would do things like bracing. You might need a wheelchair, some crutches, or bracing of a joint. There we have, elbow braces and wrist braces, and there's ring splints for your fingers. Some people can't write very well, poor handwriting because your fingers don't hold together well, is a big common problem in school. And so there's that. And obviously people will get glasses. Some people have their teeth fixed. There's a lot of TMJ. That's another big one. Think about it. What causes TMJ? It's the jaw being misaligned. You have weak tendons and ligaments. People can get TMJ just from sleeping on their sides. They can take out their shoulders just from sleeping on their sides. So from the palliative side, there's bracing and support. There's also pain management, which is very vital. And sadly, not a lot of our issues show up on x-rays and scans until they get really bad. But there's also nutritional support. There's no single diet that works for everybody, but we strongly recommend a nutrient-dense diet. Like avoid the standard American diet and all the fillers and all the junk. All the junk. I do highly recommend an organic, nutrient-dense diet that suits your body. I'm not going to give any particular diet because every body is different. But we tend to have poor absorption even without gastroparesis. There's other causes of poor absorption in this condition. And so there's a lot of our issues are what they call, the fancy word is sequelae or knock-on effects of malnutrition, even if you eat well. That's the crazy mind-bending thing. So the smart doctors recognize some nutritional deficiencies and they might treat those. A lot of people have a comorbidity called dysautonomia, which I call it the love child of weak connective tissues and mad mast cells. And so what happens is it causes dysautonomia, which is dysregulation of your autonomic nervous system. Basically, think your automatic systems, your breathing system, your heart rate, your blood pressure,
digestion,
things digestion. You don't normally have to think about these things. You should not normally have to think about these things. You should not normally have to say, okay, breathe now.
Yeah.
So if you have trouble, if you get lightheaded easily after lying down, or you get lightheaded from a hot shower or a warm bath, you may faint easily and pass out as easily. You just feel weak, or your heart starts to palpitate and have tachycardia really easily. One of the common subtypes is called POTS, P like Peter, OTS, which my old life used to stand for plain old telephone systems in the IT field, but now stands for, get this, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS, POTS. Not everybody has POTS, and you can have other types of dysautonomia, and you can have more than one type of dysautonomia. But we'll tend to run hot and cold really easily. A lot of Raynaud's syndrome and phenomenon. Your hands turn cold. You get cold really easily. Your fingers will turn either white or red or blue. Poor circulation. That kind of modeling that you get from livido reticularis. I can spell that for you. So this is, I think dysautonomia is the result of the combination of weak connective tissues throughout the body.
Okay.
And when your mast cells go off, what happens is those are spread throughout the body. They live in our connective tissue, and they may actually be the hidden player behind the hypermobile form of EDS, which is the most common form. We don't know, but there's a working hypothesis out there. And I think it's starting to gain traction, and I'm starting to give it credence also, that might actually be a big driver of the hypermobile form of EDS, or at least a lot of our issues, is that when your mast cells secrete all these substances that they secrete, which is what makes you sick with allergies and causes the anaphylaxis and pre-anaphylaxis, it messes with the extracellular matrix where your collagen is formed. That might be lending to the misformed collagen and the joint, because a lot of us get we might be hypermobile from birth, but I notice, and a lot of my colleagues notice, when we have mast cell reactions, we have flares of joint instability, which is different than hypermobility. So instability is the joints will literally give out and come apart suddenly and more than normal. So it's not just that you're bendy but hold together. It's you suddenly start to come apart.
So speaking of joints, are there, I don't know, natural things that you can do? I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the market for joints, like, glucosamine, chondroitin, hyaluronic acid, et cetera. Do any of those help at all?
They can, but at its foundation, you can't cure a genetic collagen defect, or you can't cure any genetic defect technically at this point. They're working on CRISPR technology to try to rewrite genes for certain conditions, but that's a long ways off. There's, technically no cure for this, but in terms of supportive treatment, absolutely. So we only at this point have what we call data, meaning anecdotal data. Yeah. There aren't many studies out yet. And I know a pharmacist in London, Lisa Jameson, she's on Twitter as love in your tummy. She's really smart. She was trying to get a study funded because she herself, much like myself and another person I will gladly refer people to, have had some recovery and improved quality of life since falling apart through nutritional support and certain supplements. And so the chondroitin, it's going to help certain people, but it's not going to help you build proper collagen. But when I got diagnosed on Valentine's Day 2012, which is why I can remember it, at the end of this long appointment, I had the presence of mind somehow to remember to ask my geneticist. I said, okay, so I know there's no cure. What's my best strategy? And she said, you're smart and you're right. And she said, word on the street is people are doing best with high doses of vitamin C, if you tolerate it, and which helps to lay in procollagen, which is the precursor to collagen. And the more you have, even though it'll still be faulty, apparently the more you have, the better. And I am now living proof of this because I am now walking again, albeit with a cane. And I can even do a little bit of gardening, and I can even hold my camera again and hold my iPhone again. So I've re-strengthened. I'm still, I'm twice the Jan I was in 2012, but I'm still half the Jan I used to be before 2012.
So I know there's a Dr. Diana Driscoll who talks a lot about acetylcholine, which she says is kind of a crucial part of Ehlers Danlos. Is that true? And I know she's even used like nicotine, which is kind of an acetylcholine mimic. Does supplementing that work at all?
So it's not specific to Ehlers Danlos, but I think what she's treating is some of our comorbidities. She's wonderful. She's both a fellow patient and a therapeutic optometrist. She's a doctor of optometry,
Yeah.
and her husband is also a doctor, and she's really smart. And she was one of my first sources of information and helped me to put the pieces together. And I'm so grateful. She's really lovely and articulate and funny. And they have now established a POTS clinic. So POTS, that form of dysautonomia I mentioned, because she and her family, her kids, were very afflicted with POTS. She was disabled, badly from it. And like many patients with this, which is something doctors are always surprised by, a lot of patients who aren't even doctors are very, very smart. And some patients are also doctors. And she drilled down in the literature, and she biohacked and figured out for herself and her family that indeed there's a subset of people who, and she's done a small study on it, where apparently that acetylcholine does help some of the patients who have POTS. It's not going to help everybody, but it helps a large percentage. It was a really great result. So if you don't have POTS, I don't know that it will help you. I don't have POTS. I was POTSy briefly at the height of my onset cascade or storm in 2012. I started to have tachycardia, and I even had a period where it was just weird. It was like I had molasses in my veins and I couldn't move. It was just bizarre. My friend calls it the creeps, where you just literally get stuck. You're like, I can't move. And I was literally leaving my doctor's office one day, and they're like, do you want a wheelchair? And I'm like, yeah. I was really stubborn, proud, independent, stubborn German. But mine was improved as soon as I started to take, to increase my potassium intake, and as well as magnesium. And I haven't been POTSy ever since. I'll have periods where I'm kind of woozy, kind of borderline POTSy, but I don't get tachycardia anymore, and I don't go down nearly as hard and bad as most people. I haven't tried the acetylcholine. It may very well help some people who have POTS, and it would be worth pursuing. But it's again, that's secondary to the Ehlers Danlos and the mast cell activation. So in my mind, if you work on, if you can take vitamin C, and I say if, because some people react to it. There are no panaceas for any condition anywhere. If you think about it, all doctors are making is educated guesses. They're very well educated guesses, but they're educated guesses. Anytime they prescribe something to somebody, even they, with all their wisdom and knowledge and years of training, still don't know if that patient's going to tolerate it or not. They don't know if this dosage will work or not. They don't know if that patient will have a reaction to it or not. It's always trial and error for both prescriptions and over-the-counter remedies. So I tell everybody, always start low and slow with anything until you know. And consult with your doctors to avoid, always consult with your doctors, because you want to be aware of interactions. So you can have drug interactions. There's even drug and food interactions, sometimes. So you just got to be kind of careful. So do consult with your doctors. But I'm lucky. I tolerate cheap over-the-counter vitamin C, and I have decent digestion. I'm benefiting from it. And I got better on vitamin C and high-dose magnesium and some potassium. And I've also done some other things. The people with POTS may well want to consult Dr. Diana Driscoll.
One thing I probably should have asked you earlier, is there a mild form of Ehlers Danlos, or is it kind of just like all or nothing? Like, can people have it a little bit?
It does fall on a spectrum. So that is part of the confusion and part of the reason why so many of us are getting missed. And it also can vary. So some of the rare types, such as arthrochalagic and dermatospractic and vascular, and there's a bunch of new super rare types. Those folks are super, super rare, like maybe 80 to 200 people in the world at most.
So probably not listeners.
Well, you never know.
You never know, I guess.
So we don't know. But those folks tend to be afflicted right out of the gate at birth. They will be born, they might have bilateral hip dysplasia, floppy babies, low muscle tone, weak, lots and lots of problems right out of the gate. And you'll know right away your child, you have a problem going on. And if your family isn't already diagnosed, the most common type, the real bummer here is that the most common type by far, this hypermobile type, out of the currently 13 officially recognized types, more types are being discovered as we speak. And I already know of a 14th really rare type, but it's not in the official nosology yet. But so they're going to keep adding to this opus, of EDS forms, because they're constantly SNP hunting. Research is always ongoing, and we're trying to find all the different causes, including for the hypermobile type. As we speak, there's a large hedge study going on internationally. They're trying to root out, what is this cause of this hypermobile type that we have to clinically diagnose still. And indeed, that's the whole problem, is the hypermobile type at least does fall on a spectrum. We tend to be the hardest to diagnose. We are the ones who get overlooked and missed because, again, if you can't connect the issues, think connective tissues. We've siloed the body so much that the podiatrist doesn't talk to the dentist, who doesn't talk to the eye doctor, who doesn't talk to your gastroenterologist or your neurologist.
So someone could have a real mild form of this and basically live their whole life and just have no idea that the IBS or whatever that they had is from this.
That would be my family. Yes. Yeah. I'm the first in my family to get diagnosed, and I only got diagnosed finally at 45 because I fell apart so badly. And why I fell apart so badly, that is a little bit rare and unusual. So I want to just kind of reassure everybody out there, don't panic. You're not necessarily going to enjoy my experience of this. My geneticist told me, she said, your onset cascade is rather rare. And I'm like shattered in a wheelchair. And I mean, literally, I woke up one day and I went to roll out of bed and my SI joint split. And, and I literally couldn't hold my iPhone in my fingers. It was just horrible. It was just super, super weak, super fragile.
So if someone listening to this goes oh my gosh, I totally have that, what is their first step to take?
So I would, chances are they're the first person in their family to suspect it and to want to diagnose it. And so I would try to gather as much family history as you can. And I do realize that, we have a lot of, dysfunctional families out there, and not everybody's talking to each other, and there's a lot of divorces and this and that.
Yeah.
So just do your best, gather what you can. And you're not going to get 100% of history on everybody. But as happened with me, it was oh my gosh, no wonder my dad had, his teeth wore out really easily. He had receding gums. He had crook neck thumbs. He had hemorrhoids. He was really nearsighted. My cousins are super duper nearsighted. One of them has Coke bottle glasses, really super thick, nearsighted lenses. And so gather that family history, and I would to bring to your doctor to help them suspect with you. And I would point your doctors to the EDS toolkit for doctors that I actually helped co-author with Dr. Emma Reinhold in London. She tapped me because of following me on Twitter. She liked my writing and how I expressed things. And I seem to bait the hook really well with doctor scented bait. And
yeah, it's a great Twitter account. People should definitely follow it.
Thank you. Yeah. And so she tapped me to be a fellow patient expert to develop this EDS toolkit for doctors, which is kind of like a Cliff Notes online for doctors to get up to speed really quickly on when to suspect and how to diagnose this. And I can give you that website. It's because it's kind of a crunchy one.
Sure, shoot it over to me. I'll put it in the show notes.
I'll shoot that over to you. It's hosted by the Royal College of General Practitioners in London, and so I would point your doctors to that, and I have that on my website as well in many prominent places because I'm not only am I proud of it, but it's really, frankly, just really useful, and also an authoritative source. And then the other thing I would urge them to do. So that would help to get their doctors up to speed really quick. If their doctor is like, well, I don't know about that, then give them that website and let them go, do a crash course real quick. And then the other thing I would do is to find your local support group, if there is one. And if not, my friend John Furman in Ohio is happy to help people set up new support groups. Like literally, if you're out in some area that you're maybe out in the boonies or kind of out in the country or away from, a population center, and you're feeling kind of isolated and you can't find a local support group very easily, and you want to start one, he's really happy and really good at helping people to start support groups. And his website is edsawareness.com. And so there's a bunch of support groups all over the world now, both through him and as well as the Ehlers Danlos Society. I recommend joining the support groups as well as online, both on Facebook, and I'm now on MeWe, which is an alternative to Facebook for those of us who want to get off of Facebook. I'm running both. I have a group in both places as well as on Twitter. And because then you can meet your fellow patients, you can stop feeling so alone and stop feeling crazy, and, compare stripes, so to speak, literally in person, and then also find out like the lay of the land in your area. Who are the best doctors to see? And
so basically get diagnosed, look at your family history, find a support group, and then I always try and figure out a way that you can move forward in a hopeful way. You're saying like some of these things like vitamin C and magnesium and maybe some joint stuff is going to be pretty helpful.
Yes, and I would actually reverse that list that you just gave and put get diagnosed at the end of it. You want to find the support group first and find the doctors first, gather your family history first. That's all going to help you get diagnosed. Okay. And then hopefully you get diagnosed. And please think long game, think marathon, not sprint, because I know you might have had a lifetime of issues like I did. I mean, it took me 25 years from my first major complaint of lower back pain at 20 and IBS at 20 to finally get diagnosed, 25 years later at 45, only after I fell apart. You shouldn't have to go through that. That's why I'm blogging and writing and tweeting. And thank you so much for this podcast, because you're going to help speed the process for other people. The more awareness we get, and then as far as hope and help, I do think it's a tough condition to live with. But if people stop and think about it, first of all, you've already made it this far, right? Your record for making it so far is 100%. Right? Yeah. If you've gotten this far without the support and without the validation and diagnosis, you can make it the rest of the way. Okay. You now have some information, you now have some support. And even if you don't have a diagnosis tomorrow, my group, at least anyway, I welcome all comers, because I get it, how hard it is to get diagnosed. It can take up to a year or two to get diagnosed. Even when you have like tons of evidence, it may take a while to find a doctor who's willing to recognize and refer you, or to do it. I mean, it really varies depending on where people are. Everybody, the Ehlers Danlos Society, myself, and the NIH in London, with the EDS toolkit, we're all trying. There's a lot of people, and there's some other organizations that are all trying to increase awareness. And I'm not the only blogger out there. I may just be one of the most humorous and vocal ones.
So I know we're coming up on about an hour here. I know you're writing a book. How can people get it? What's on your plate next?
Sure. Thank you. I've been trying to write this book for 7 years now, and I'm being thwarted at the moment purely by just poverty. I'm on disability and I'm not able to work reliably. And because of my low income and my high rent here in Portland, Oregon, I'm struggling with, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so what I most need is some support, which people can do on my Patreon site. So a little plug there.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm trying to get this book out because I want it to be relatable. I don't feel sorry for myself, not at all. And in fact, I feel really lucky and blessed because I was given, a great analytical mind, and even if I have weak connective tissues, I was given a good, strong internal backbone, so to speak. The piss and vinegar needed to get through this process, and I'm grateful for that. Not everybody has that, and I'm also continuing. I'm on something called the Cusack protocol, CUSACK. That's Deborah Cusack's last name. She's a fellow patient who also has biohacked a solution. And she has a website, which I can give you, and she has a Facebook group. It's a wonderful, warm, welcoming Facebook group. We have the most inspiring, amazing recovery stories in there. Even a vascular patient who, the mother of the child said that her son was doing so well on this protocol. He's not cured. Nobody's cured, but we get better. We get stronger, and we can endure more, and we injure less, and we rupture less, and we just start to hold together a little better.
Real quick, what's in that protocol?
What's in the protocol is she drilled down and discovered a polysaccharide recipe that seems to help. She's really smart. and figured out in the literature, polysaccharides help to support the extracellular matrix where our collagen is formed. And for whatever reason, and I think this is even some of the fibromyalgia groups have been finding the same thing. They not necessarily known as the Cusack protocol, but I think there's some crossover discovery there. And so I'm taking, for instance, the main ingredient that she recommends is 100% fractionally distilled aloe vera juice. I said 100% fractionally distilled up front on purpose because it's really key to get that exact form. And through trial and error, she tested on herself and her family. So, an N of 4, for over several years, they tried everything, and she tried all different types of it. And she said 2 things. One is you won't react to, so some people will still react to even this 100% fractionally distilled form, but it's the best type for the majority of us. It tastes like water. So it doesn't have the stuff that most people react to in aloe vera juice. It's not your usual cheap aloe vera juice that you can find on the shelf. You can find it over the counter. It's very special. Okay. And the brand is George's, the guy's name, George.
Gotcha.
And then additionally, also she discovered a probiotic called L. rhamnosus. So Lactobacillus rhamnosus. The brand name is Culturelle. You can find that over the counter. And it has antihistamine properties, and it seems to really even out the gut problems. It will help lower some of the IBS, and it will lower the histamine levels, we have high histamine levels with the mast cell activation. If you Google histodalia, a lot of people are going to go, oh my God, you just described my mom or my dad or me. Yeah. I think a lot of bipolar is actually soft bipolar, and it's really histodalia waves.
Interesting. So it sounds like there's something you can definitely do.
Absolutely. And I've gotten better. I've been on the Cusack protocol myself for about 6 years now, and I'm positive that I'm doing as well as I'm doing. I'm not cured, but my friends can all tell you, they've literally watched me. It's like watching your hair and nails grow. You don't get better overnight, right? But talk to me in a month or 2 and you might need a trim. So kind of like watching your hair and nails grow, your body is constantly turning over cells. And my geneticist said this too. She said, that vitamin C, you're not going to be cured overnight. You're not going to feel a difference overnight. But she said, talk to me in 5 to 6 weeks, and you'll probably notice a really subtle shift and difference. And that is exactly what happened, which is why I'm so positive and sure of myself in that there can be, if people can digest things, some positive results for many people. For those who have terrible digestion or can't digest at all because of gastroparesis and other issues, I want to point you to my friend Medora Pennington's blog. She's a fellow Ehlers Danlos patient, and she lives in LA, and she has a wonderful story of recovery. She's amazing. She went from completely bedbound from childhood to traveling the world
wow.
on vitamin C shots.
Okay, so IVs.
Yeah, not IVs, but shots, injections. She treats herself like a burn patient, literally with daily injections of vitamin C.
So actually into the muscles?
Into the muscles, intramuscular C injections. And her blog is lessflexible.com, lessflexible.com. And she spelled it all out on there. It's really a wonderful story and exciting. And the only reason I'm not doing vitamin C shots yet is just because I'm too poor.
Yeah.
And I need to get my doctor to be on board and to prescribe it. And I think if I had the money, I would go to my doctor tomorrow. Yeah. And my doctor knows me and is on board with her. We discuss things and make sure it's going to be safe. But they're happy to work with me now because I always I hold them blameless. Like I'm trying this. This is my idea. And some things work, some things don't. And I react to some things. I can't take all of the Cusack protocol. There's other components than what I mentioned. Okay. But those are 2 of the biggest that I would recommend people start with. So there's some hope and help for this. And also the last therapy I would recommend also that doctors can prescribe is prolotherapy, which people in the sports field will recognize. It's common in the sports field for sports injuries. You literally get the cheap form. It uses sugar water. They literally inject it into your tendons and around your joints. And it causes a healing crisis that literally causes your tendons and ligaments to tighten up. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I should do a whole podcast on prolotherapy because I know my mom
Exactly.
did it for her. She had a bad shoulder and it worked fantastically. Never had to get surgery. So that's a really cool therapy that's out there.
Exactly. And there's different types of it. You can do a whole podcast on it. And of course, I highly recommend the best form that you can get, which is the platelet-rich plasma therapy, but it's expensive and it's a medical procedure, and it's hard to get. But I have another friend in Southern Oregon who I watched go from bedbound to walking again, and with this, and it's just a remarkable recovery. So there is some hope and help. And another young woman in Texas did well with stem cell therapy. And I haven't looked into that. I can't afford any of these things myself yet. And I don't know how she's doing now. This was about 5 or 6 years ago, but she had a remarkable result with stem cell therapy. Nobody's cured. We can't rewrite our DNA, but there seems to be, again, anecdata, a lot of benefit from nutritional support, the prolotherapy, this stem cell therapy, which is helping a lot of conditions, has a lot of hope for a lot of conditions. Including some autoimmune things. So, and then I would support your immune system as best you can, because we seem to come with, for whatever unknown reason, a ton of, we have really weak immune systems and tons of allergies, as I already mentioned, which is a whole other podcast.
For sure. Well, let's wrap it up there. So Jan, thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for helping raise awareness of this. I like to say we put the sin in syndrome.
Wow. That was quite the interesting interview. So a lot of show notes to go over if you are interested in learning more and checking out Jan's site. I thought the Cusack protocol was particularly interesting. It's funny, when I worked at a health food store, we sold tons of George's aloe. I mean, I never tried it myself, but people seem to love it, for a variety of conditions. And I remember it just tastes like water. And I always thought, is this actually anything? Anyway, it just makes me wonder how many of them might have been hypermobile or have Ehlers Danlos. So I just love doing this show and learning more and more about the human body. It's awesome. Okay, thanks for listening, folks. Go to quackspodcast.com where you will find all the episodes and our Amazon banner to shop through if you want to help us. You can follow me at QuacksPod on Twitter if you want daily updates, interesting studies I find, and occasionally the clever comment or quip. Shoot me an email at quackspodcast@gmail.com with questions or show suggestions. Be well.
Crying.